Hi everybody, and welcome to our first LiveCode coding questions session. We'll just wait a few minutes to see if anybody more joins us. But thank you all for joining me today. So you'll see that there is a sort of chat client in the webinar software. So you should be able to, if you've got any questions, just type them in there and I will do my best to pick them up. I'll have to move the chat window off screen while I'm showing you things because otherwise the browser shows to you and you get a sort of infinite copy of the browser. So what I'll do is I'll show something, then I'll switch back over to the chat and go back and forth like that, and hopefully we'll pick everything up. So my plan was just to do a sort of brief overview of LiveCode and sort of a tour of LiveCode and a couple of simple things to get people started. But of course, we're actually really here to answer your questions. So if you do have any questions, if there's anything that you have tried out that didn't quite work, anything that you would like to try and you're not sure how to make a start on it, then I will do my best to help you. So just wait a few minutes just to see if anybody joins, because it's only just after 5 now. You can see behind me, I am working from the spare room in my flat, as I'm sure probably pretty much everybody is working from home at the moment. So this is why this is not a normal LiveCode office environment behind me. So if anybody does have any questions at the moment that they want to pop in the chat, I'll try and get through them all. But if you do have any burning questions, then pop them in there now, and I'll get to them after I've done the sort of the brief tour. I'm assuming that most people attending are maybe quite new to LiveCode. I don't know if that is actually the case. But we'll be sort of starting from a basis of not much knowledge, at least of LiveCode. You may have general programming experience, or you may be brand new to programming from scratch. So I'm going to work on the basis that you're at least new to LiveCode and work from there. And if it seems that that's maybe too sort of at too low a level for people, then we'll ramp it up a little bit. But we'll be starting with the LiveCode basics anyway. So we have one question so far from Mohammed, who's asked if it's possible to program a social community platform like Facebook with LiveCode. So, I mean, obviously, Facebook is an enormous project with many developers working on it. It's absolutely huge. What I would say is that LiveCode is a good option for for a front end for something like that, for the app side of it. Of course, for something like Facebook, you're going to have like a huge sort of online aspect to it. Now, LiveCode does have a server engine, and if you really wanted to, you could try and do it all with LiveCode, but I would say that while LiveCode would be very good for a sort of front-end app for something like that, you would also need to really think about how you want the sort of the back end, the server side to work. Yes, a basic one, of course, but yes, absolutely. I mean, you would be able to connect your LiveCode front end to some sort of server system. How you choose to implement that will depend on what you want, but yeah, definitely. A few more questions here. So Bruce has asked how to create a menu that scrolls from left to right on touch, similar to news apps. So that's the sort of the think it's sometimes called a chiron or a chiron. I'm not sure how you say it, but the sort of the streaming the text underneath. So that's something we can certainly have a look at. David's asked about backwards compatibility. How often does the syntax change? It's very, very rare that we would change the syntax and it wouldn't be backward compatibility. Almost all syntax changes are us adding things. And we work really quite hard to try and preserve backwards compatibility as much as we possibly can. So it should be very, very rare that you would need to rewrite your code to adapt to a new version. Of course, there will be cases where that does happen, but they're few and far between, and we do work quite hard not to break backwards compatibility. The ideal, of course, would be that you would be able to open a LiveCode project from 10 years ago in the newest version, and it would work. And we work really quite hard to do that. And if there are cases where we would be breaking something like that with a new version, we would document that. So we would make it really clear that we're changing X. And so anybody who uses X in their program might want to look at that, but it's very rare. And then Peter's asked, I've been trying to find a good explanation of arrays. In the guide tab of the dictionary, it says. Okay, so certainly we can have a look at where the array documentation is. And also, if that doesn't quite cover it, we can do a little quick array tutorial here today. That's quite a nice thing to get started with. Okay, so at this point, I think we'll just make a start with LiveCode. If anybody else joins us, then hopefully they'll just be able to jump in wherever we are. So I'll start just by opening up LiveCode Indy. Hopefully everybody's at least got this far, but I'll just do a sort of little tour of the IDE. So we call the LiveCode IDE, which is the Integrated Development Environment, and that is the part of LiveCode that you work with. These palettes, the stacks that you make, that's all the IDE. The other aspect of LiveCode is what we refer to as the engine, and that is the part that actually does all the heavy lifting. The nice thing about the IDE actually is that it's written in LiveCode. So if you wanted to, you could go in and you could see how the actual LiveCode IDE is written and get some tips, and you could see how some of it's written. So, and you can also extend it yourself. You can change it if you want to. So that's quite a nice feature of LiveCode. It's quite meta. It is in fact written in LiveCode. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen so that you can see what I'm doing. So I'm gonna have to hide the chat while I do it, but I'll bring it back up now and then, and just try and keep an eye on it. So when I do this, you'll see why I have to hide it, which is when I turn on screen sharing, then we get this nice infinite looking at the browser on the screen. So I'm just going to close it for now. We're going to have a little tour of the IDE. So like I said, this is our IDE. These are our different IDE palettes. And this is what you'll see when you first open up LiveCode. So we've got our menu bar and our toolbar here. So these give you access to all the sort of really useful basic things in LiveCode. We've got our tools palette, which is what allows us to create our LiveCode objects. And we've got our start center here. So this sort of points you at a lot of our resources. So you can see here, this is a list of my recent stacks. So this is all the recent projects you've been working on. So you can just open them up from here. And then here we've got our interactive welcome, which if you haven't looked at that yet, I would recommend that. It's a little interactive tutorial that shows you how to drag controls on, move them around, add script. It's a really nice way of getting started if you haven't done that yet. The new button here, that'll allow us to create a new stack. We've got some sample projects, some tutorials. So that points to our lessons portal, which you might already have had a look at as well. The lessons portal is a really good resource for finding out how to do different things with LiveCode. We've got our in-depth guides, our forums, which are also probably worth joining if you haven't done that yet. We've got quite an active user base on our forums. Lots of them are very experienced LiveCode users, and they'll often answer questions very, very quickly, depending on what time zone you're in and how many people are awake, of course. But the forums are really worth joining if you think you might have some LiveCode questions. This just is our blog, so that's just our LiveCode blog. And this links to your own LiveCode account where you can see your products and things like that. So these are just some sort of nice, easy getting started. Open it up, click on what you want, go to your recent projects. But I'm just going to close this just now to get this out of our way. And we'll just create a first stack. So all your apps in LiveCode will be stacks. And a stack is made up of a set of cards, and each card can have a different appearance, and you change what screen your app is on by switching between cards. So the stack and card sort of metaphor is like imagining a stack of playing cards, and you just change which one's on the top and you get a different view. So the first thing you always want to do when you're creating a new stack, a new project, is to create a new stack. So we've got our default size, which opens up just as a square. And then we've got some sort of standard iPhone and tablet sizes. So I'll start with an iPhone 6 size, and it just opens up a stack at that sort of standard size. You can resize it by dragging it around, but it's just a nice way of getting it started, getting the right aspect if you're going to be working on a mobile app. So that's your stack. This stack has one card. So all stacks have at least one card, and you can add more cards as you need to. So now we'll have a look at our tools palette. This is where all our LiveCode controls are. And you can see that there's sort of two sections. So there's, I would say, three sections. So at the top, we've got our two modes. So we've got our pointer tool, which is our selection mode, and we've got our browse tool, which is also called the run mode. So LiveCode, you can instantly switch between editing your stack and working on it and browsing or running your stack. So there's no sort of compile time. When you want to test your stack, you just switch modes, and then you can interact with it as a user rather than as the creator when you're editing it. So at the top here, we've got our widgets. So these are relatively new to LiveCode now. They've been around for a while, but they're relatively new. And then down here, we've got what we call our classic LiveCode controls. So the classic LiveCode controls are things like buttons, fields, drop-down menus, things like that. And the one you're interested in, you just grab it, drag it onto the stack, resize it where you want it to be. You want a button. So that's how you create controls. So these are our classic controls, they're very basic. Now here we have our widgets. Now I've got quite a lot here because there's ones that I've written and worked on for particular things. You'll probably have a slightly smaller set because you'll just have the ones that come packaged with LiveCode to begin with. So widgets are slightly more complex controls, but they're still sort of, we call them atomic controls. Like they're single controls. There's no sort of inside to them. You can't go any deeper. And they're written in a LiveCode called LiveCode Builder, which we created specifically to allow you to create your own custom controls. So LiveCode Builder is something that in time you might want to take a look at, but for now I would just appreciate the power that the widgets give you. So we've got some nice widgets here. So for example, here is a header bar. So this is a sort of a ready-built mobile header bar. So before we had widgets, you would have had to create this with multiple controls. So maybe a background graphic, a button here, a field here, another field, a button, group them all together. Whereas this is a single control that you can set the properties of. So here is a nice segue into properties. So every control in LiveCode has a set of properties that describe how it looks. So for example, our button, so I'm going to open this up. So there's from the object menu, you can open up the object inspector. Alternatively, you can select it and then click the inspector in the menu bar, whatever you prefer. So here, for example, this, because this is one that we just dragged out, is just called button. So I could change the name of that to say hello, and that would change the label on here. And you can change how it looks. So you can change it to a rectangle button. You can turn off the 3D property, change the border, font objects, color, font options, color options. This is how you control how your UI will look. It's all with the properties of your controls. Similarly, here we have a field, so it's got a slightly different set of properties. Things like you can lock the text, you can tell it not to wrap. Again, I'm going to change the name here to name in this case. Now, it's always a good idea to set the name of all your controls, because later on when you're writing your code and you want to be able to refer to your controls, you want them to have unique names. If all your buttons are called button and you want to do something with a particular button, then your code needs to know which one you're talking about. So always give your controls unique names so that you can refer to them later. And similarly with our header bar, even though this is a widget rather than a sort of classic control, it's just the same. It's got a set of properties. You can turn off the title, turn it back on. Again, these all just control how the control looks and also how it behaves. So once you've created your really simple UI, we're currently in edit mode, which means we can select things, move them around. When we want to test it, what we do is we switch from edit mode here to run mode. So you can see it's changed here and the control have changed. And now when we do things, we can click on the controls and we can do things rather than editing them. When we want to make changes, we switch back to edit mode and we can move things around. We can change sizes. So that's important to remember, just whether you're in edit mode or run mode, one for making changes and one for actually running your app as if you were the user. So I'm just going to briefly come back to the chat just to see if anybody has any questions or is saying anything at the moment. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. Okay, so no questions at the moment. If you do have any questions, just pop them in the chat and I'll switch back and forth and pick up any questions that you have while we're working through this. Okay, so I'll just go back to LiveCode again. Okay, so now we've got the beginnings of our app. We've got some controls, we've set the properties so they look how we want them to. So now what we want to do is we want to be able to actually add some code to interact with our app. So the way that it works is that LiveCode is what's called an event-driven language. So basically what happens is LiveCode will tell your app when events happen, so when the user does something. And when the events happen, you add the code to respond to those events. So probably the most basic one is when a button is clicked on. So what we want to do is we want to select the control that we're interested in, the control that we want to respond to the event, and we open up the script editor. So again, we can do this from the object menu. We can open the object script, or we can have it selected here and we can click on the code button here. And here is our code editor. And you'll see here that we're looking at button say hello. And here we have a list of all the handlers that can be sent to a button. So this is all the messages or events that the button would receive. And the most basic one, the one that you would usually want to respond to, is mouse up. So there's also mouse enter, mouse down, mouse leave. So if you actually want to do something when the pointer goes inside the button and out again, but without being clicked on, you can respond to mouse enter and mouse leave. But usually you want to do something when the button is actually clicked. And so you get mouse down and then you get mouse up. And you only need to respond to the events that you are interested in. We also call them messages. So this is the mouse up message. It's the message that is sent to your app or to your stack when the mouse is clicked. The mouse up message is sent, and we write a handler. So we're basically saying on mouse up. So we're saying when on mouse happens, we want to do something. And what we'll do here is we'll just pop up a dialog for the user. So we will say answer hello world. And so the answer dialog, that will just, I've spelled answer wrong there. The answer dialog will just pop up a dialog with this text in it and an OK button. So once we've added our code, you'll see that this little indicator here is yellow, and that means we've made changes, but we've not applied them. So we need to click the apply button. The shortcut is also to hit the enter key. And now it's gone green. And so we know that this code is okay. There's no errors in it, and it has been applied. So if I made an error here, deliberate error, it's gone yellow because I've made a change. When I click apply, it will tell me that there is an error. So it's gone red to show me that there's an error. It's marked the line that the error is on, which is helpful if you've got a really long script, and it will actually show you which line the error is on. And down here in this errors pane down here, you'll see it says there's an error in button say hello, compilation error at line 2, script missing, quote after literal. And that's because we've started quote here, but we haven't finished it. So I make my change, I apply it again, it's green now. To test it, I switch back into run mode. So now I can click the button and it pops up an answer dialog for me. So then what we can do is we can actually use some of the other controls that we have added. So for example, if I type my name in here, what we can do on mouse up is we can get the contents of this field. So we can say put the text field name, which is what we called our field, and we'll create a variable to put it into, just t name. So the variable is just a container that will now have the text of this field in it. And instead of saying answer hello world, we can say answer hello t name. This will pop up the dialog and it will say hello. And then the two ampersands together in LiveCode, that's string concatenation with a space. So that's just gluing these two bits of text together with a space in between. A single ampersand is just string concatenation with no space. The two is with a space. And I put the brackets round just to contain all that together. So again, I will apply my script, make sure it's green, make sure I'm in run mode before I try working with the script. And now when I click this, it will say, hello, Elanor. So we've got a variable, we've retrieved this property, and we've used our answer dialog. And one more thing that I'll show you here is how you would debug your code if it wasn't doing what you expect. So for example, here, we've created a variable called tname, but if I made a typo here, so I'm referring to a different variable here. T just stands for temporary. That's a sort of, it's just a coding convention. T is for a temporary variable. So here I have referred to a different variable than the one I created here. So there's no error, there's nothing actually wrong with the code. When I click on this button, it's not going to do the thing that I expect. So I'm like, it's not quite right. So what I'll do is I will put a breakpoint on. So a breakpoint, just click next to the line number that you are interested in. And the breakpoint means that the script will run, but it will then pause wherever you have put the breakpoint. And then you can do things like you can check the variables, you can see what's happening. So with my breakpoint here, I click the button again, you'll see that it pauses. And now here, we looked at the errors tab before, but there's no errors. We switch over to the variables tab, and I can see all the variables that belong to my script. So there's two, there's tname, which contains Elanor as expected. And then there's tnam, which is just tnam because it doesn't have anything in it. So now, because I've been able to look at the values in my variables, I can see what's wrong. I can stop the script from running by clicking on the stop button there. I can make the change, reapply it, and it behaves as I want it to. So that's just a useful thing to know right from the off, is when you want to run through your script but pause it and do some debugging, you just put, and you can have as many breakpoints as you want, you just put breakpoints on all the lines that you are interested in pausing on. And then when you run your script, it'll pause on those lines and you can look at your variables, errors, other things in here. This tells you where all your variables are. You can see what's going on. When you're ready, you can either stop the script, so that just stops it at that point, or you can continue running if maybe you want to jump to the next breakpoint. So you can just continue it and then it will finish running. Okay, so I'm just going to switch back to the chat in case we've got any questions before we move on. Okay, we do have some questions, so let's see. So David's asked, when I click the plus to add the mouse up, then I get boilerplate, which is what we would expect. And when I type inside the boilerplate, it's flush to the left. Is there a setting to automatically indent it? So yes, there is. So let's add another one here. So let's just do mouse down this time. So what you can do is it'll be like that. Now, if you hit tab, it'll automatically indent your code. Now, there are some settings where you can choose what sort of, excuse me, didn't share my screen again. Oh, and yes, what I'll do is I'll switch the text size on the script editor up a bit so we can see it a bit better. So let me share my screen because I forgot to do that. Sorry about that. And then it's a chance for me to show you something else as well. So in the LiveCode preferences, if you go to the script editor pane, then you can change the font and you can change the size of the code. And you've got your handler lists. They can be alphabetical, colorization. There's lots of options here. So there's general options here in the preferences, but particularly for the script editor, I was looking at the text size. So the preferences are a useful place to go for, particularly for things to do with the appearance, other things like that. But also you can have the property labels. They can be a description or the actual name of the property, things like that. So hopefully that looks a bit better now. So I think I didn't have my screen sharing on, so I'll just do this again. So if I add another controller here, so mouse double up, that's the one that I clicked on. When I first type, it's over on the left. If I hit tab, it'll automatically indent. Similarly, if I say things like if true, then it'll automatically finish off my if statement for me and indent it where necessary. So there are some controls to, there are some options that you can use to control which features of the script editor you want to use. So if I go to the edit mode here and go down to options, here are all the options. So there's variable checking, live errors, bracket completion, bracket highlighting, control structure completion, which I've got turned on, which is why the if statement did that. Sorry, there's autocomplete and there's auto format. So the auto format one is where if you hit tab, it will indent your code for you. The control structure completion will do things like if statements, repeat statements. It'll automatically put the if at the end, things like that. Live errors will show you where there are errors in your code as you type. Bracket completion means that if you type that, it'll automatically give you another bracket. I have most of these turned off just from, I was using LiveCode for a long time before these options were added, and I'm so used to it that I don't use them. Bracket completion and bracket highlighting. So bracket completion will complete your brackets. Bracket highlighting will help you match up your brackets. If you've got a long piece of code with lots of brackets, then you can see where they actually all line up with each other. Autocomplete will give you options as you type for things that it could be. So if I turn on autocomplete and then start typing, it's always hard to think of an example if we're doing something in mobile. So there's mobile control do, mobile control delete, mobile control set. So you can then just use the arrow keys to go to the one you want and then hit tab to automatically put it in with the boilerplate for the parameters and things like that. What other options was I going to show you there? Just going to turn autocomplete off again. And then the other one that's actually really useful is the variable checking, which would have prevented the error that I made earlier. So by default, LiveCode does not require you to declare variables before you use them. Lots of programming languages will require you to declare variables and to give them a type actually before you use them. LiveCode doesn't do that. It lets you create variables on the fly as and when you need them, and you can put whatever you want to in them, strings, numbers, booleans, it's all fine. Now, what you might want to do in order to avoid things like the example that we had earlier was you might want to turn on variable checking, which will mean that you do actually have to declare your variables before you use them. You don't need to give them a type because LiveCode is an untyped language, but you do have to declare them. And the way that you declare a variable is you say local tname, because that's the one that I want to use. Let's take that out, so that'll give me an error as well. So that's fine. But now, if I had made that same typo as we saw earlier, then you'll see here that there's a compilation error on line 4. Sorry, the text down here hasn't resized like the text up here, but it's basically telling me there's a compilation error on line 4. Can't create a variable with the name tnam because I've got explicit variables turned on, which is the sort of internal name for variable checking. So basically, if I'd had that turned on, it would have picked up on my error immediately and we wouldn't have had to debug it. So then I can fix it and it compiles again. So yeah, so there's quite a few options that you have for your sort of autocomplete bracket completion, formatting, variable checking, all those things, and you can find them all in the edit menu under options. Just going to switch back again, have a look at any other questions that we might have. How can I change the color of iOS native buttons, background color and text color? And then, yeah, so I'm upped my script, so hopefully that the size of my script, so hopefully that's a bit better. So when it comes to buttons, so if I add a normal button, then there are color properties here. I think I'm able to turn this off as well. Oh, it's just the header and footer size I can change there. So you can change the background fill color. Let's see, change that to blue. The text fill can be a color. You can have a different border color if you want. And this is a 3D button, so it looks a little bit, so it just looks kind of 3D, so we can turn that off. We can set the border down to 1, or we can actually turn off the border. We can change the text size, make that a bit bigger since we've made our button quite a lot bigger. So these are all controlled just in the property inspector. You can make them look however you want. When it comes to sort of iOS native buttons, we do have a widget pack that sort of recreates some of the iOS and Android native controls. So you could use that if you were interested. And there are certain controls on mobile that we actually provide the native versions for. So there's a native player, a native browser, a native scroller, and native text entry. So the text entry one's really useful because it provides all the sort of the controls that you would expect on iOS or Android field, where you can hold down your finger and move it around. You can clear it by clicking on the sort of X button that's there. You can copy and paste into it. So those are super useful, and they are created. Another thing that's useful is to show you the dictionary. So that's what I'll show you next. Actually, I'll just show you the dictionary quickly because I was going to talk about mobile controls, but we'll go through the documentation a bit as well. So mobile control, create. So you have to create these in script. So it's mobile control create, and then the control type, and it's one of browser, scroller, player, input, which is text input, or multi-line, which is a multi-line text input. And these will actually create the native controls on iOS or Android for you. Other than that, like I say, you can control all the properties using the property inspector. And we do also have some widgets that provide sort of native looking controls. So this is a sort of recreation of the iOS header bar. This will look different if you actually deploy it to an Android device. And then there's also a widget pack, which gives you some more sort of native controls. So while we're here, we will have a look at the dictionary. So the dictionary gives us the API for all the commands, functions, all the handlers in LiveCode. So here, just go to search and you can search for the thing that you're interested in. So for example, we were doing mouse up. So here's the mouse up entry. So you have the syntax, which is mouse up, and then the button number, which will actually tell you which mouse button was clicked. 1, 2, 3, left, middle, or right. Some examples, and then a sort of longer description of how it works. And we've also got all the related messages. So mouse still down, mouse double up, mouse release. So mouse release is very similar to mouse up. Mouse up is sent if you have mouse down and mouse up over the same control. But if you click on a control, let me go into run mode. If you click on a control, then move your button and then release, you don't get mouse up, you get mouse release, because you only want mouse up if you actually click on the button. If you come over here, I'll use the say hello button because it'll be more examples. So a better example, sorry. So down and up over the say hello button, you get this. Down, move, release. You don't want to do the say hello command. You don't want to actually cause that to happen. So you would respond to mouse release instead. And then we had talked about our widgets earlier. So the way that you can find the specific properties, commands, things that are related to the widget. So you can actually search in here for the name of the browser widget. So this is a header bar. So if I search for header here and look at the header bar widget entry, then this will give me a sort of general description of the widget. So it's a description of the header bar, a summary, a description. Then I've got a list of all the properties that it has. So I think we looked at show heading or show title. Which one was it that we changed? It was this one. Oh, it's label. So label we turned off. So there's the label entry here. And it just says whether the title is empty or not, or what the label is, sorry. So actually the label there, that if I change that, that's actually going to change what's displayed. We turned off show title, which is actually show label. So show label here is the one, and that's whether or not to display a title, whereas label is the actual title. So that's one thing we can look at here. So in general, the property inspector will show you a sort of description of the property, visible or disabled, show title, first action on left. If you hover over it, it'll actually give you the name of the property. So there's the name of the property and then there's the description. And the reason that you need to know the actual name of the property is if you want to control that in code, then you actually need to know the property name rather than just the description. And that's something that you can change in the preferences. If you'd prefer that the property labels were the description of the option or the name of the LiveCode property there, then you can switch that here. And just to give you a very quick example, all the properties of any control can be controlled by code. So you could have it in a button or in a card script or a stack script. So every card and every stack actually has script as well. So you can do things when the stack is opened that aren't actually inside a button or a field or anything like that. So you can control things that happen when the card or the stack is opened. You can also put handlers that are used multiple times in a card or a stack, and it'll be able to find it. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail shortly. We'll just have a look at the property now. So for example, if we wanted to change the visibility of, it's got a visible property. It's one of the ones where the description and the label are actually the same. So you can see when we switched it, the tooltip is actually changed to sort of the inverse. So if you're showing the property name, then the tooltip will be the description and vice versa. So here's another little tip that's quite useful, is our message box. So if I click on this, it'll open up this message box here. And this is a little tool that lets us, we can just execute single lines of code. We can try things out. So here we can actually have some live code that's not associated with one of our controls. So I can say set the visible of button say hello to false. So that's the name of the property. Set the visible of button say hello to refer to our button here to false. And if I execute that by hitting return, then it'll become invisible. And then I can set it to true to turn it on again. And that is exactly the equivalent of setting it to false or setting it to true in the property inspector. And we need that because the property inspector is only available while you are working on your stack, while you're editing it. If you want to change the properties of your controls once your app has been built and is in the hands of your users, a common thing is to disable and enable buttons until, for example, if you've got a form, you don't want to enable the next button until all the required fields have been filled in, then you can set the disabled of button to true or false in your code, depending on the state of your app. I'm just going to pop back over to the chat and see if there's, oh, I didn't screen share. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Right, so I will, well, this is the problem. Next time, I'm going to have a second monitor that I can look at the chat on. This is one of the perils of working from home and not having your exact normal setup. So I'll turn screen share on. Sharing now. Hide this. And I think I was showing you about button properties. You got to hear everything I said if you didn't get to see it. So again, I'll just quickly show you. When you've got a control here, I'll just open up the property inspector again so that you can see it. Then you can control all the properties here. So we've got the background color, the foreground color, which is the text color, text properties like the size, the 3D, the border, things like that. You can completely control your how everything looks there. And like I said, there is a widget pack that allows you to have some widgets that create native controls for you. So that's something that if you're particularly interested in, rather than using the LiveCode controls and using properties to control how they look, you could have a look at that. And then I was also talking about our dictionary. So our dictionary here, click on just on the dictionary button in the menu bar to open it up. And this is the API for LiveCode. So it's all the controls, all the handlers, everything like that. And we were looking at, we used mouse up earlier. So here's our mouse up entry. There's the type, which is a message, which means it's one that is sent by the engine when the user does something. And we've got the syntax, so it's mouse up and then a button number. So it actually will tell you which of the buttons was clicked, the left, middle, or right. You can do different things. We've got some examples. We've got some related, so you can go straight to mouse double up. If you want to go back again, we've got a little back button up here. So this is the main place that you will find the API for LiveCode with syntax, examples, related concepts, things like that. So this is the best place to find out exactly how to write the code that you want to, if you want to find out how to write a piece of code. And since we were talking about mobile buttons, I mentioned Mobile Control Create, which allows you to create some native controls on mobile. So we have a browser, a scroller, a player, an input, which is a text input, and a multi-line, which is a multi-line text input. And these have to be created in code. So it's mobile control create, and then the control type that you want to make. And these will actually create native Android or iOS controls on your stack. And then to set the properties of them, we have the mobile control set command. So for example, here you can set the visible, you can set the rect, you can set the file name of the player. And that's all covered in the dictionary. So those are the sort of 5 types of native mobile controls that you can create out of the box with LiveCode, as it were. And then the other thing that I told you about was I was telling you about the message box, which is you can open it up here from the menu bar, just clicking on the message box button. And this allows us to execute single lines of code, to test things out, to send messages without the code having to be in one of our controls. So we can do set the visible of button say hello to false. It will become that crashed LiveCode, which wasn't particularly helpful. I'll just open that up again. So I'll just create another new stack because I hadn't actually saved that stack. So I will put a button on here. I'll call it say hello. I will open up the message box. Here we can say set the visible of button say hello to false. So the visible is the name of the property. This refers to our say hello button, and this is the value. And then to turn it on again, I can set it to true. And the reason that we want to be able to do this, the message box is really useful, but in general, we want to be able to set properties of controls in code, because while you're editing, while you're creating your stack, you have access to the property inspector. But once your app has been built, if you want to change the properties, for example, disabling a button until a form has been filled in or anything similar to that, then you want to be able to do that in code. So all our properties can be controlled in code as well as by the property inspector. So setting the visible of button say hello to true or false is exactly the equivalent of turning it on or off in the property inspector, which just allows you to control that from your code. Okay, so I think that was everything I covered when I wasn't screen sharing. So I will come back and just have a little look at the chat again. Okay, so no more messages at the moment. So I'm just going to tell you a bit about what we call the message path in LiveCode. And this is how messages are sent through the sort of hierarchy of your stack. So here we have a stack. It has one card and one button on it. So if you imagine the sort of hierarchy, the card is at the top, and then on the level below that, you've got all your cards, however many you've got. And then below that, you've got all the controls on the cards themselves. So here, this is very basic. This is sort of like there's the stack, then there's the card, then there's the say hello button. But it's enough that we can see how the hierarchy works. So the way that it works is a message is sent when an event happens. So in this case, when we click on the button, we get a nice up message. I'm just going to answer the hello here. And so that message arrives with the button, something happens, and that's it. The message has been handled. So this is called a handler, and it handles the message and does something. And then that's it. It doesn't get any further. Now, the way that the hierarchy or the message path works is if the button did not handle the message, if there was nothing here, then we've got our card script, which we can open up from the menu. And this is associated with our cards. We're on card ID 1002. And if I put my mouse handler here, and just so that we know exactly where we are, I'm going to answer card, say hello. So there's nothing in the button now. It's on the card. Make sure we're in run mode. Click the button, and you'll see we're now on card, and we're saying hello. And that's because the message wasn't handled by the button, so it passed up to the next sort of higher level in the hierarchy, which is the card. And then equally, we can have it on our stack. And again, from our object menu, we can open up the stack script. And here we will have stack say hello. And if I click this, then it goes to the button, but the button doesn't do anything with it, so it passes up to the card. The card doesn't do anything with it, so it passes up to the stack. Now, the interesting thing is that if we did handle it on our button, I'll put one on the card here as well so that we just know where we are. So now we've got a handler on the button, a handler on the card, and a handler on the stack. When I click it, it gets to the button, and then it stops because the message has been handled. We are done with it, we're finished. Unless we don't want to be, in which case from our button, after we're done with it, we can pass the message. And if we do something with it and then pass it, we're actively saying, please pass this message up the hierarchy, up the message path to the next level. So now we would get it on the button, and then we would get it on the card. And if we wanted to, we could also pass from the card. And this would mean that it would reach the stack. So we would get to the button, to the card, to the stack. And this can be quite powerful depending on how you want to structure your app. Depending on where you put it, you can handle things on the object script, on the card script, or on the stack script. And using the message path, it will reach to the top. So if we had multiple buttons, so what's happening here is when I'm clicking on the stack, on the card there, it's actually going straight to the card. So it wasn't on the button because I clicked on the card, and then it's hitting the stack as well. So because cards and stacks can also get mouse up messages, I'm just going to comment these out so that they don't keep getting sent all the time. Because what we could do is if we had multiple buttons, so if we had loads of buttons, let's call this A, this B, this C, and this D, and we always wanted to handle their mouse ups in a really similar way, instead of having to have the code on all the buttons, we could just have a mouse up on our stack, and we could answer short name of the target. And so the short name of the button is say hello, or A, or B, or C, or D, and the target lets us know which of the controls was initially clicked. So now if I go into run mode and click on A, we should get A, C, B, because none of these buttons have handlers, so it's bypassing the card, which also doesn't have a handler, and jumping straight up to the stack, where we can use our answer dialog to pop up a dialog and say the short name of the target, which is basically saying the short name of the button that was clicked on. So that's the basic level of our hierarchy: stack at the top, then cards, then the controls on the card. And so messages don't pass between objects on the same level. So all the controls on a card, they're next to each other, they're on the same level of hierarchy. Messages only sort of pass up, so they go up from a control to a card to a stack, but they don't go from button A to button B to button C. Just come back to the chat again. So David's asked, in the answer dialog, I see the LiveCode logo. So where is that icon set? So that is, unless you set it explicitly, the answer dialog will always show the LiveCode logo. You can change that. So I'll remember to share my screen again this time. So when you come to actually build a standalone, so I'll need to save this stack before I can do this. I'll just save this onto the desktop. So when your app is not necessarily finished, but ready to be built and tested, you want to build it as a standalone. So that is, then you're building it into an app that will run without LiveCode. You can give it to other people, they can run it, they don't need to have LiveCode installed. And to get that ready, from the file menu, you choose standalone application settings. And here are all the settings for the different platforms that you can build for. So Mac, Windows, and Linux, they're the sort of default desktop platforms. So we've got iOS and Android. And before you can build for iOS or Android, then there's some other setup that you need to do. You need to install some other bits of software, Android Studio and Xcode and things. But once those are all set up, you can build from here. And there are options in here that you can set up. So we're on Mac, so there's icons in here that you can see, and you can see here there's icons to display on ask and answer dialogues. So these are two different sizes. The application icon, I think they're just two different sizes, and the small application icon. So if you wanted in your app for your own logo to show up on ask and answer dialogues, then you would just select your logo file here in the standalone application settings. And then when you're running the .app or the .exe file, your user would see your logo rather than the LiveCode logo. And the other things in here, there's general settings. You can just set the standalone name. There's the version numbers, copyright notices, all these things. You set all these up. And then when you're happy with the setup, you go to File, and you choose Save as Standalone Application, and then that will actually build the .app file or the .exe or the .apk or whatever it is that you need for the particular platforms that you have selected here. And then I'll just have a quick scroll through the questions, and apologize again for not sharing my screen earlier. I think a second monitor where I can have the chat next to my screen will help that for next time. We did have a question earlier about arrays. So let me share my screen again, and we'll have a look at where the array documentation is. So in the dictionary, so we've got our API, which is our sort of general API for commands, functions, all those things. We also have our guide, which is basically our sort of user guide, which is sort of more like a book than an API. So it's maybe not the easiest thing to navigate. I don't know where the section on arrays is. So the other place that you can look that is equivalent to this is in our help menu. So we've got a bunch of things here, sample scripts, beginner's guide, tutorials, things like this. But we do have in here our user guide, which is the PDF version of our user guide, which might be a little bit easier to look at. So here I can actually search for arrays and click on here, and here's our array variables section, which gives you more of an overview of arrays in LiveCode. So there's how to create arrays, deleting elements of array, listing the elements in an array. So this is maybe a good place to look. So it's in the help menu, the user guide, and it's just the PDF version of our user guide, which is a bit more readable than the sort of the dictionary entry. But there should be some useful stuff in the API about arrays anyway, I think. So if we look up array here, so this is a very basic entry showing you how to create arrays, put array is an array. So that could be quite useful. Also, if you're working with arrays, then it's worth looking up element, which shows you how to sort of do things like repeat for each element in monthly receivables, where monthly receivables would be an array. So yeah, element and array in the dictionary, and also the array variables section in the PDF user guide, which is available under the help menu. And in the guide, we should be able to, from here, let's see what section this is in. It's in probably in programming a user interface, actually. This is all about referring to objects, properties. I'm guessing that arrays is in this section somewhere. It's just not very searchable, so it's sometimes actually easier to search in the PDF version than in here. So you can see there are the chapter headings down here, but I'm not sure where the arrays are. Sorry about that, not particularly useful. I'll maybe feedback on this to the team that the guide is not very searchable. But the guide here is just the equivalent of the PDF here, and at least in PDF you can search for the section that you are interested in. Okay, so let's see. A couple of questions. Can the resulting standalone application be reverse engineered? No, it can't. The sort of the file structure is difficult to reverse engineer. You can set a password on your stack, which makes it a bit more secure. So that's another option. So you can look up password in your stack. So you can set the password of the stack to your password, and then that's another layer of security for your actual standalone. And then, would it be bad practice to embed a personal password or key to log into a remote API within my code? Again, what you could do if you needed to do that is you could encrypt that password in the code. We've got encrypt and decrypt functions, so you'd be able to encrypt that and then set a password on your stack for more security. And then, is it possible to display an array in a field? Yes, I will just quickly show you a nice way to display an array in a field. So let's just close this back and start a new one. So what I will do in here is I'll have a button and a field, just checking that I am screen sharing this time. So in my button, I will add a mouse up handler, and I'll just make a very simple array. So I'll put a entity array 1, and then the entity array 2 and the entity array 3. And a really nice way is to convert your array to a JSON format and then put the JSON into the field. And we have array to JSON and JSON to array functions. So now what I can do is I can say put array to JSON. And I'm sure everybody's familiar with JSON. It's just a sort of text markup, text description language. And then we pass it our array, and we'll put that into field. I'll call my field data. Remember to give the field a name. So when I first do this, switch to run mode, click on the button. Oh, I've got explicit variables turned on. We did that before and I forgot to turn it off. So I'll need to declare my variable. So it's just local t array before I use it. Then we've got our ABC here. Now there are some extra options to the array to JSON function, which can make it a bit more readable. So here's our array to JSON. So the first parameter is the array. Then you can choose to force the root type or not, and you can ask it to pretty print. So I don't mind about the root type, so I'm just going to leave that empty, but I do want it to be pretty. Now if I click this, then you get a nice formatted JSON array. Now if that isn't quite what you want and you want to write a loop yourself, then what we can do is we can do repeat with x equals 1 to the number of elements in T array. And then we could, for example, put X ampersand, so string concatenation, then a tab, then the value in the array X, and we can put and return, and we can put that after our field 1. So what this will do is this will look at each of our 3 elements, and it will put the number and then the content of that element, then a return character to start a new line. And what we can do is we can put after field 1, and that will just keep appending to the end of the field. So now if I click this, it'll run through that repeat loop, and it should put our sort of array data out to the field. So if the JSON method doesn't give you exactly what you want, you can write your own repeat loop to format the content of the array however you need it to be. Okay, so I'll just come back to the chat again. I'll stop sharing my screen. And then do arrays start at 1 in LiveCode versus 0? So yeah, it's usually 1, but in LiveCode, they don't need to be numerical. Our array keys, instead of being 1, 2, 3, they could have been ABC or XYZ. But yeah, when you're sort of counting, if you're looping over the elements in the array, it would usually be 1. Okay, so that is pretty much, that's the end of our hour. So I hope you have found it useful. I think these are going to be weekly. I can't remember what the information that Stephen sent out to you was, but hopefully this has been useful. And again, apologies for not sharing my screen when I should have, but I will try not to forget that again. And yeah, I hope you find it useful. And if you do have any more questions, I believe that there is going to be another webinar next week, and hopefully I will see you all then. Okay, thank you for coming along and spending this hour with me, and I do hope it was useful. And thank you for your kind words of forgiving me for not sharing my screen. Yeah, it happens. It happens. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming along, and I'll see you next week. Get some nice questions ready for me to tackle. Hopefully you'll have a week to try some things out, to maybe make a start on any apps that you're thinking about, and come armed with some good questions. Okay, thank you, everybody.